Alright, so today we are going to be doing the first tutorial for this 6.5 by 8.5 mini album, so stay tuned. Hey and howdy everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Jeannie with Paper Pixie Ink, and today we're going to start the tutorial to make the 6.5 by 8.5 mini album using the Simple Stories Spooky Nights collection. So this is the 6 by 8 paper pad. I really like this company because they do offer the 6 by 8, which is a really good size for mini albums, and you don't really have to do a lot of trimming and cutting down to make a lot of your pages, which is really nice. So I got the 6 by 8 paper pad, some of the enamel dots, I got some of the little ephemera pieces, and then I also got one each, I believe, of the cut apart 12 by 12 papers. So there's some 4 by 4s and some 2 by 2s and some 3 by 4s and some 4 by 6s. And then there are some journaling cards that are cut to assorted sizes. So I use these throughout the album. I did have some left over, but you can use as many or as little as you want. And then I also got the little tags. So one side is like a journaling area, and then the other side is just kind of cutesy. So that's the collection that we're going to be using to make this album. So all in all, it came together pretty quickly. So let's get started. So since I wanted my album cover to be 6.5 by 8.5 by 2.5, I went ahead and cut some chipboard to those sizes. So I cut 2 pieces of chipboard to 6.5 by 8.5, and then 1 piece of chipboard to 8.5 by 2.5. To cover my chipboard, I used some 65-pound black cardstock, and I kept it pretty simple. I just used 3 pieces of cardstock that I glued together, and then I put the spine in the center of it so that the folds would not end up being on a seam, and glued them all down. Once I had them glued down, I went ahead and cut off the excess on either side, on the left and right sides, so that I didn't have to fold that over to create the cover. Alright, so now that I have my excess cut off, I am going to go ahead and cut off all 4 corners so that I can miter the edges. To do this, I use a tool that I picked up off Amazon, but I've seen a bunch of different sellers on Etsy with them. There are a number of sellers on Amazon as well. I find it a useful tool because I don't have to guess how much to leave in the corners in order for me able to miter them properly. So I like using it. A lot of people are really good at just cutting it on their own, so to each their own. Now once I have my corners cut off, I'm going to go ahead and fold up my 2 long sides just so that I can get a nice bend going in the paper before I go ahead and glue it. And then I'm going to put some double-sided adhesive along the chipboard edges on the top and bottom in order to glue them down. And then I will use some liquid adhesive on the edge on the cardstock along the edge of the chipboard in order to get a nice clean edge to them when I fold it over. And now I'm going to miter the edges. I'm going to use the tip of a bone folder to kind of fold the edges in, and then I'm going to repeat the same steps. I'm going to apply some double-sided adhesive, I'm going to fold the edges up, I'm going to apply some liquid adhesive and burnish it all really well with a bone folder, and then make sure that I have some nice clean edges. All right, so now that we have our base completed, I'm going to use some lace that I bought. I think I got it from Amazon, as a closure to hold the album closed. So I'm just going to cut 2 pieces, and then I'm going to use some double-sided adhesive to glue them down. So I'm going to put some double-sided adhesive down to adhere it to, and then I'm going to put some double-sided adhesive over it, because I really want to make sure that this stays in place really, really well, because a closure is something that's going to get used a lot and it's going to get pulled on. Alright, so now it's time to create the binding. So we're just going to take a piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and we're going to trim to 8 1/8, or 8 if it's easier. And then we're going to score it at the 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, until you have enough tabs to attach 4 pages to. So that's going to be 12 scores at 1/2 inch each. And then when I'm done scoring, I'm going to go ahead and apply some double-sided adhesive. I'm using 1/4 inch from scrapbook.com, and I'm going to apply it between the first and second score lines. I'm going to skip the next section, then I'm going to do the next 2, skip a section, next 2, skip a section, etc. And then we're going to go ahead and add some double-sided adhesive on the flaps on either side of our binding that will be attached to our chipboard cover on the left and right sides. Alright, so now let's go ahead and make all of the folds and make sure they're nice and even. We're going to burnish them very well with our bone folders, and then we'll remove the adhesive for each one of our 4 tabs for our 4 pages and apply some liquid adhesive and glue them all together. Alright, so now that we have our 4 tabs and they're very, very well burnished, we're going to go ahead and apply this to our front cover. Before we can do that, we need to cut a little bit of our edges on our tabs off. You don't have to do this step. I just find that I have an easier time applying my pages to the spine to the binding once I have them completed. So You can skip this step if you want to. I just find it easier personally. So let's go ahead and take up all of our backing for our double-sided adhesive, and then we're going to apply a bunch of liquid adhesive over it, especially along the seams for your tabs, and then we're going to eyeball it and apply it down to the spine on our cover. Alright, so now that we have our binding in place, it's time to finish off the base cover. And to do this, we're going to need 2 more pieces of cardstock, and they're both going to be cut to 8 1/4 by 6 1/4. And then we're just going to apply some liquid adhesive on them and apply them down to the left and right sides centered. Alright, so now that we have the base cover completed along with our binding, I'm going to go ahead and figure out how I want to decorate my cover, because I don't have tons of the paper and embellishments and whatnot. I want to make sure that I get the cover the way that I want before I go ahead and create all my pages. So let's go ahead and do that. I am using a little bit of black glitter cardstock that I have in my stash. This is from Recollections, I believe. Yeah, Recollections from Michaels. And I like their glitter cardstock. You can get it on sale. Sometimes buy one, get one, sometimes 50% off. So I like it because it is, you can get them in various colors, and they have as you can see, quite a bit of sparkle to them. And I mean, they're not too thick, they're not too thin, the glitter doesn't really come off. They're really, really great to use, and I find them to be rather affordable in comparison to some of the other brands of glitter cardstock. When I'm creating my covers, I kind of like to plan it out ahead of time. I lay things out, and as I like things, I keep them. If I can't decide, I create a separate pile, and I go with what I like and what works for me. Sometimes I keep it very simple, sometimes I have quite a bit of details, but I always enjoy making my covers because they're the first thing that you see as part of an album. Alright, so now that I have everything laid out, I'm going to just pick it up and move it to the side so that I can go ahead and start gluing everything down. Now, the glitter cardstock was cut to 8 1/4 by 6 1/4, and then the paper that I decided to use for my cover, I just left as is because it was part of the paper pack, which was already cut to 6 by 8. That's why I love these paper packs, because they are great for making this size album without having to do a whole bunch of cutting. Okay, so because I decided to keep the cover of this album very, very simplistic, I decided to add a little bit more dimension to some of the ephemera pieces. I am going to add some cut pieces of chipboard to the backs of them. This just pops them up a little bit and gives it just a little bit more dimension than if you just glue everything down directly to the cover. So I just use scrap pieces. I always have scrap pieces of chipboard, and this is my primary use for them. I use them a lot in my albums, both on my covers and inside my albums, to pop elements up just to give it a little bit more dimension. Alright, so now it's time to create our base pages, and these are pretty easy and we only need 4. So in order to make these, we need to cut 4 pieces of cardstock to 8 3/4 by 7 1/4, and then 4 pieces of cardstock to 8 1/4 by 6 1/4. Once you have your cardstock cut, the larger pieces, you are going to score them at 1/2 inch and then 6 3/4 inch. And then along the other side, you're going to score them at 1/2 inch. So that when you fold the 2 sides and the bottom up, you're going to end up with a page size of 8 1/4 by 6 1/4. All right, so now that we have all of our pages or our cardstock cut and scored, we're going to go ahead and cut off all of the 2 corners from each of the scored pieces of cardstock, so that when you fold those flaps over, that they're not going to really overlap with each other, so that you get a nice clean flat page. And then let's go ahead and fold and burnish along all of our scored edges so that we can get our pages glued together. So these pages were created so that they have a top pocket on them, and then one side is going to attach to the binding on the spine of our cover. So what we need to do right now is adhere one side and the bottom of our pages together, and then the other side of the page will adhere to the binding to create the closure on that side, which will leave the top open for us to create our little pocket inserts. So let's go ahead and apply liquid adhesive along the right edge and bottom of the scored cardstock, and then we'll lay on top of that a piece of our 6 1/4 by 8 1/4 cardstock, and we'll do this for all 4 pages. Alright, so now we have our base 4 pages created. I'm going to go ahead and quickly cut the cardstock that I need for my 4 inserts for my pockets, and I'm going to cut those to 6 inches by 8 3/4 inches, and I'm going to cut them taller than the pages are because I do want them to stick up a little bit, and you'll see why later when we create those inserts. So I cut 4 pieces to 6 inches by 8 3/4 inches, and then I'm just going to take my scalloped crocodile and I'm just going to cut the left and right side on the top to create more of a tab insert for my pocket pages. Alright, so that's the end of the first tutorial. We've created our base cover, we've decorated our cover, we've created a tie system to close the album, and we've created our base pages. So our next tutorial is going to be starting decorating and building out our pages for our album, so stay tuned for that. As always, if you're interested in seeing more, don't forget to click on that subscribe button so you'll see in your feed when I've posted new videos. Thanks for watching, everyone.